Welcome all, and thank you for having me. I want to share with you my insights on Bloom's taxonomy. Of course, this is not my own work or my own research work because Bloom's taxonomy is already very old, as we might say. It started in the 1940s, but I think it's still very actual and very recent and usable for recent education. And I want to share some insights with you on this topic. So the agenda and the program for my presentation is thus. I first want to welcome you and introduce myself shortly, but I can do that very short because I have seen that I was already introduced and was already told some things. Then I want to give you a brief overview, not too extended, but a brief overview on gifted education in the Netherlands, since I'm from the Netherlands, and I think it might be interesting to you to hear how the gifted education is going on in our country. Then I will make a step to the differentiation and the use of Bloom's taxonomy. So I want to share with you why differentiation is important in the first place. So why should we do it in the first place as we look at it from gifted education? And how do you do it? If we know why it's important, then how can you do it? And then I want to talk to you about how you can stretch the environment instead of the child. And use an ecological point of view to illustrate that. And then I want to move on to explain Bloom's taxonomy in the whole. So it's not only about the cognitive domain, but also about the affective and psychomotor domain. And I want to talk to you about the importance of an integrated approach. So no fragmentation, but integration. And I want to finish with explaining what you can do in your daily teacher practice. So how you can use this and what you can do in your lessons and how you can use Bloom's taxonomy as this framework. And as already stated, we'll end up with a Q&A, questions you might have and answers I might be able to give to you. And I want to finish this program with telling you that the handout of this presentation will be available afterwards. There will be a translation available as well in Russian, and there will be an English version. And all the references I'm using are shared on one of the last sheets. So if you are interested in any of the references and want to learn some more, you can see the last sheet and all the references will be there. So that said, we'll start with the welcome and the introduction. So welcome on behalf of me from the Netherlands. I'm very, very enthusiastic about the amount of people in this virtual room and the possibilities of sharing insights with each other from the Netherlands to Kazakhstan and backwards. So I'm honored to be asked to present for you, and I want to tell you a little bit about me, where I do come from. Well, I was a teacher myself. I was once trained as a teacher and specialist in young children, so in early childhood development. And now I do work as a senior counselor and teacher trainer in the Netherlands. And my specialty is gifted education. So I had this ECHA Specialist training that was contributed by ECHA once a long time ago. And now has part on the Radboud University in the Netherlands. And I was trained myself as an ECHA specialist, but I also teach at the Radboud International Training on High Ability nowadays. So that's very nice to do. And it's very important, in my opinion, that a lot of teachers get this training and learn about gifted education. And I was the former president of the Dutch ECHA Association. We have the European ECHA Association, which works for gifted children and development of gifted children and adults. And we have an association in the Netherlands as well, which is an alumni association. And it has over 300 members right now. So that's very, very nice. A lot of people involved in this theme and a lot of people involved in gifted education. So that's where I come from. I was drawn to this topic a long time ago, since I started the ECHA training, and since I am an early childhood development specialist as well, I was also interested in the broad development of children. And for me, Bloom's taxonomy is one of the ways to make sure you have an integrated approach and see the child as a whole person. So that's how I got interested in this theme. And during my research, I found out that a lot of people know Bloom's taxonomy for the cognitive domain, but a few people know about the whole background and all the possibilities it gives us. So I hope I can tell you a little bit more about that today. So since I'm from the Netherlands, it might be interesting to know what the status is of gifted education in the Netherlands. And I think I'm a very proud former president, since in the Netherlands, there's a lot going on in the field of gifted education. And not only the field of gifted education, also for gifted adults, for example. So it's not only specified for education. We have been lucky enough to get governmental funding. Of course, schools have funding, governmental funding for education, but we also got some extra funding for enhancing gifted education and professional development of teachers, both in primary and secondary education. And a lot of schools have taken part in programs to enhance this knowledge. They have knowledge now in the school, so they have specialized teachers, for example. They have extra activities, but also extracurricular activities, pull-out classes, and we have some full-time gifted education schools, both in primary and in secondary education. Now, I must say that in secondary education, there are not too many, but they are coming and it's getting better. And we are starting with professional development, not only for education, but also for preschool and kindergarten. And I think that's very important too, since I'm an early childhood developmental specialist. That's very important to me too, because it starts before primary school, in my opinion, and also for adolescents, like in university, in college, and in vocational training. So there's a lot of professional development going on in the Netherlands right now, thanks to this funding that we had. But still, I think there is a lot to do as well, like practical support for teachers, complex cases that are still sometimes in schools, in classes, need expertise. And there's still a need for more knowledge for a lot of teachers and a lot of different schools. And we think it might be great if in teacher training, there would be more possibilities to get some training on this topic, because that's not the case yet. But there is a lot of teacher training possible, and one example is the RITHA training at Radboud University. As I mentioned, this is a training on high ability and trains for being this ECHA specialist. And there are a lot of other possibilities for teacher training as well. Sometimes it's only short, sometimes it's training of a year. So there's a lot of training going on and possible, but still we have new teachers that need to know some more, for example. And as I mentioned, we have this Dutch ECHA Association, which now has 350 members. That's quite a big association for this small country, in my opinion. And they work together. These are people from education, like teachers, but there are also psychologists, general practitioners, doctors, pedagogues, like a lot of people involved in the field of childhood development. They work together and try to get gifted education a booming topic, and I think they do manage to do so. So I'm a proud former president, as you can see, and I think there's a lot of things going on, and still it needs some more work as well, always. But that's okay, that's no problem. So now I've mentioned a little bit about the background in the Netherlands and my background. I want to talk to you and talk you through Bloom's taxonomy. So I hope it's all understandable. I'll try to speak a little bit slower because I'm very enthusiastic and I tend to speak very fast. But it's in English, that's not my language as well. So I'll try to slow down a little bit so the translator has time to translate and you have time to process all the things I tell you. Now, before I want to speak to you about Bloom, I first want to tell you something about the background in theory. Oh, I'm sorry. This was the one I wanted to talk to you about. It's like, why is differentiation so important? And there's a few things I want to tell you about that. And of course, it's not all there is to say about this. There's no time to talk about all of it, but there are a few things I want to highlight, so to speak. So in 2015, the American Ecological Association released the top 20 principles from psychology for education, and they also applied it to gifted education. So they looked into the gifted research, and they looked into the top 20 principles, and they combined those together. And among these principles are a few that consider fostering motivation of students. And important for enhancing this motivation is the fostering of creativity and the intrinsic motivation of students. And not only the external motivation, like external goals, goals from the school, goals from the teacher, or goals from the parents. So this intrinsic motivation is important as well. And what they stated, it was very important to work with mastery goals instead of performance goals. And this is an important one for our classroom. I don't know how it is in Kazakhstan, but in the Netherlands, it has been for a long time that children have to get these performance goals. So they have to have some goals. They have to do that and show that they can do it, and then it's already finished. But for some students, they can already do it. For example, when a student wants to learn how to read, and they are in a classroom where reading is the performance goal, then they read and they are finished. But some students already learn how to read before they go to school. So for them, a mastery goal is very important to be motivated and stay motivated. So this is a very important goal when it comes to gifted education. And you can only make this possible by differentiating in learning goals, because some students already master something and can already perform some goals, and some students don't. So the only way to do this is by differentiating learning goals and differentiate in practical applications in the classroom, because there's a lot of possibilities there as well. Because if you have practical applications that allow creative thinking and give the student autonomy in how they process the content, this works for motivation as well. So from this top 20 principles, you can find it online. I don't know if it's translated though, but it is in English. You can distract some important points of view for gifted education and differentiation. Now, another why is found in the mega model of Subotnik and others. And they have created an integrated model based on several talent development models. And they have seen which factors are very stable in all those models and put it together. in very short. It's not all of it, of course. And in this integrated model, they state that talent development relies on the competence of teachers and mentors. So there's a very important role for teachers and mentors in education. They say that it's very important that teachers and mentors are able to differentiate in goals and in learning strategies, and that they spark the curiosity of students in this way. And they call this, and I love this saying, they call this teaching for falling in love with learning. And that's amazing. If you can teach children to fall in love with learning, that enhances the motivation so much. I think that's a lovely thing to say and a lovely thing to strive for as a teacher, so that you make your students fall in love with learning. So this important role of the teacher and this falling in love and this learning environment, we can also find it in a differentiated model of giftedness and talent from François Garnier, who will be speaking later. Very honored to be part of the same program. And in his model, he points out the importance of environmental catalysts and learning activities. So also Garnier is pointing out this importance. This environment is very important. Learning activities are very important, and they contribute to development from gifts to talents. So also Garnier is saying these activities are very important, and it's important that students get a form of formal learning, and that you have to differentiate to achieve that. And the last model I would like to refer to in this short overview is the Actiotope model of Albert Ziegler from Germany. And he is very much from an environmental point of view, and he points out the importance of the learning environment to make gifted behavior possible. He says you can only show gifted behavior if you make the environment in a way that gifted behavior is possible to show. So a good learning sociotope, a good learning environment can enhance the action repertoire from a student, the things a student can do. And it can contribute as well to the subjective action space. And what they call the subjective action space is what a student thinks he is able to do. So the action repertoire is the actual action repertoire a student has, and the subjective action space is what a student thinks he can do. And this is an important difference. We know, for example, that a lot of girls think that they are not that well in math or in STEM education. And in fact, they are probably very good at it, but they think they are not. So the more a student thinks he is able to do things, the better it is, and the better he can enhance his action repertoire as well. So I've shown you a very short and limited insight on gifted education and differentiation. Of course, there's much, much more, but there's no time to speak about all of it. But I hope that I made the point of differentiation clear for you in gifted education. So, 1 second. So, since I've told about the why, I want to make the step to the how. And if we talk about how you can do it, we have to talk about the environment and the child again. And I want to use the ecological point of view to explain this to you. So how can we make this possible for our students? I want to stretch out this importance of this learning environment and the competence of this teacher. And I want to make that clear by looking at this topic from an ecological point of view, like Yuri Bronfenbrenner described in his bioecological model. And you can see this model here in the sheet. And Bronfenbrenner has talked about how the individual is set in various systems, like the microsystem, which is the school, the peers, the family, the very close related systems that interact with the individual at almost a daily basis. Then he talks about the mesosystem, that's the second system around the individual. And this mesosystem is about the interactions between the factors in the microsystem. So that's about the interactions that school and family have together, or peers and school have together. Then we have the exosystem, that's a little bit further away from the individual, but still has influence. For example, as you can see, the social services that are available in the environment of the child, the neighbors, some local politics that can be influencing the possibilities of development. And the last system is the macro system, and that's about the society, values in society, the culture a child is living in, the country a child is living in, and the attitude towards education, for example. So that influences, in the end, what possibilities a child has as well. And each individual is very unique in its gender, age, social, economical status, but also in temperament, in personality, in intelligence. So there are a lot of, each individual is unique and has a unique interaction with its environment and backwards. Because that's what Bronfenbrenner is also saying, that it's not only the systems influencing the child, but also the child influencing the system. So it's interconnected. For example, you can imagine that if a child is very has a large temperament and is easily bored and easily getting mad, that it's another interaction with a teacher and classmates than if a child is very introvert and very easygoing and very quiet in the classroom. So you can imagine that there's a different interaction between those different individuals. So if you look at children and education from this point of view, there's a very important role for the school as well, because the school is in the microsystem and it's very close to the child and is interacting not only with the child, but also with the parents and the peers and the other factors in the microsystem. And as a teacher, you're part of the school, you're part of the things you do in the classroom, and also the class in which a child is important in this system. So now, since a long time, school has been focusing on a kind of an average child, which does not exist because each child is different. But somehow we've made some average viewing points and said, when a child has this age, he needs to do this. When a child has that age or is in that class, they have to do that. So we made this system about the average child, which does not fit for every child, as you can imagine. So if we wanted to stretch the child to fit into this average, you can imagine that not all children's needs are met in this classroom. But on the other hand, we can't make education individually customized for all children in one class. That's not doable. That's practically not doable for a teacher. If you have a class filled with about 25 to 30 students, like here in the Netherlands, you can't make 25 to 30 learning plans, individual, customized for each child. That's not working in daily practice. So how can we stretch this environment instead of the child and make it work? And to learn how to do this, we can think about the story of driving a car. That learns us how we can stretch the environment. You can imagine that you can't make each car custom made for each driver. That would be far too expensive if everybody had a custom made car. That's economically not rentable. But what we can do and what is done in cars is that we stretch the possibilities so that each driver can choose how to set the chair, how to set the steering wheel, how to set the mirror to look in, and drive safely. So we have the same car, but the possibilities inside the car are stretchable and make it possible to drive safely. So what we need to do in education is stretching our learning environment by differentiation and making choices possible for the student, and each child can learn something. And in that way, motivation will be fostered. So now we've talked about how we can do it. I want to dive into Bloom's taxonomy with you and explain the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domain of the taxonomy and the importance of an integrated approach. And as you can see, Bloom's taxonomy was a taxonomy for learning goals. That's how it was designed. And as I already stated, they started with this design in the 1940s of the last century. And it's much known for this cognitive domain in education, but there's much more to it. So it was designed not only by Benjamin Bloom himself, but there was a group of psychologists and scientists in education who came together to design this framework. And they agreed that there were 3 domains of learning goals in education: the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. So they believed that the student was an active and holistic person that was defining its own learning process. So they saw, just like Bronfenbrenner, the child as an active factor and an actor in his development and in this system. And they also emphasized the intertwined connections between the different domains. So they said you can't take it all away from each other. It's all intertwined, and you can see it in this picture very well, that you have this mental skills and knowledge in the cognitive domain, you have the attitude and self in the affective domain, and you have manual and physical skills, in the psychomotor domain. But you can't have the one and not use the other. It's all intertwined. So they developed the cognitive domain, and it was revised in a later stage by a part of the group. And they wrote the affective domain as well. But the psychomotor domain was described by various authors, and they each had a different focus on the psychomotor domain. I'll come to that a little bit later. And all of these 3 domains are designed as the taxonomy for learning goals. So they have different stages or levels and sub-levels. And important is, in my opinion, to point out that these stages or levels are equally important in the vision of the group who designed them. So there's no hierarchy. Sorry, it's a difficult word in English for me. But they are all important. There is, though, an increase of complexity or level of abstraction, but it's not an increase in importance. So that's very, I want to point that very clearly. And as I stated before, the authors emphasized the importance of an integrated approach instead of fragmentation of the learning goals. But unfortunately, in education, the affective and psychomotor domain are not very well known worldwide, and the focus is much about the cognitive domain. So, the first I want to talk to you about is the cognitive domain, so that you know what we are talking about. And here you can see the revised version of the cognitive domain. So as I already told you, that original group has described the cognitive domain in 1956, but it was revised by a part of the original group, and it was written down by Radboud and Anderson in 2001. And the original group already stated that this taxonomy was a work in progress. And this few among Bloom himself were involved in this revised taxonomy. And as you can see in this cognitive taxonomy domain are two dimensions in the revised version. We have the dimension of the cognitive process, and you can see that's remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And there you can see the increasing complexity of cognitive process. And what they say is that you have to be able to remember things to understand them. So there is the building up of the process dimension, but it's not that creating is more important than remembering. It's equally important, but it's also said that to be able to analyze, evaluate, and create, you have to be further in your cognitive development. So that's more like secondary education, but sometimes gifted children can already do so. And then you have the other dimension. It's the knowledge dimension. And the knowledge dimension is also increasing in complexity and in abstraction. And they talk about factual knowledge. So this is the type of knowledge that you are processing with your cognitive process. So you have the factual knowledge, the conceptual knowledge, the procedural knowledge, and the metacognitive knowledge. And you can also see this building up in complexity and abstraction. And you can specify a learning goal by applying this cognitive process on the knowledge dimension. And I've pointed out two examples for this. For example, the learning goal can be applying remembering factual knowledge. That can be a learning goal for a student. And then you could say the student can remember the capital of the UK. That's factual knowledge. The capital of the UK is London. And remembering is the cognitive process that the student is doing. And you can also say, I want the student to analyze conceptual knowledge, so that the student can analyze information and think about conceptual knowledge. And then the example would be the student can analyze which city is best suited as capital of Scotland. So to do so, a student needs to know how Scotland, what Scotland is, needs to know the concept of a capital. What is a capital city? What makes a city a capital city? And a student needs to analyze between the different cities in Scotland and think about other capitals in Europe and think about what city might be best suited. So you can see the difference in both knowledge and cognitive process through these examples. And still the subject is a capital city. So I hope you can already see some of the possibilities for differentiation by this example. And this beautiful picture is not made by me, it's made by somebody from Iowa State University, and it's very illustrative on the increase of complexion and how you can connect those two together. So, looking at my time quickly, going well. So now that I've pointed out this cognitive domain, I want to tell you about the other domains that are not that well known. So, first of all, the affective domain. And the affective domain was described by Bloom, Benjamin Bloom, Radboud, who also wrote on the cognitive domain, as we saw in the last sheet, and Masia. And they made this taxonomy of goals considering the attitude and the self. And this focuses on awareness, on emotions, on feelings and opinions, because we're not only thinking beings, we are human beings and we feel things and we have emotions that influence how we think and how we act. So I think this is a very important domain in society, and it's a pity that it's not that well known and not that well served in education, actually. So if you consider Sternberg's theory on successful intelligence and leadership, you might say this domain contributes to being wise and being a good person and doing the best for society, not only for yourself. And in this affective domain, there are 5 stages described. And I will shortly take you through these 5 stages. The first stage is receiving of stimuli. So are you open to stimuli, and are you receiving the stimuli that you should? And it's not only stimuli, you could also say, are you open to some subject of a lesson? If a student's not interested in capital cities in Europe, and you are talking about capital cities, they might not hear what you say because they're not receiving your information. So it's very important as well that you check if your students are receiving and are open to your subjects. And you could say that an example is that you hear music playing. And the next stage is responding to the stimuli. And it might be voluntary because you hear something and you like it, or you're singing in the classroom and you like it, so you want to react to that. But it could also be obligatory because the teacher says you have to sing, then you start singing. So it's not only responding from intrinsic motivation, it could also be from from obligatory motivation. And you could say, you could translate that in I listen to the music. So you don't, you're not only hearing the music, but you're listening to it and you're thinking about it. So that's responding to a stimuli. The next stage is valuing what you are responding to. And that's about acceptance and preference. And you can imagine that this is only this is very much influenced by experience you already had. If you heard music when you were a baby and you liked it, then it's maybe you like music a lot. If you heard music at a time that you were shocked in some way, it might be the case that you don't value it that much because you have this bad memory about it. So experience from early childhood are influencing how you value the things that the stimuli or the subjects you are talking about. And you could say like, I like the music I hear, or I don't like it. And you check your internal values and see, what do I think about this music? Oh, I like it. Or I like this color, or I don't like math, or I do like this classmate. So it's all about valuing what you're experiencing. The next stage is organizing, and that will they mean that you develop some value systems. So you have this value and you check it with the values you already have, and you have some systems you create internally. So, for example, you like a specific kind of music. You like classical music a lot, but you don't like rock music. And that means that you have a lot of different music styles, and you value the music you hear and you can relate, this is rock music, I don't like that, or this is a classical piece, I do like classical music, I like this piece as well. And the last stage is the characterization, where you work on an internal consistent system, and this is something children do later on, like in secondary education, and they develop a vision of life, like and that you are consistent in these values, even though society or your environment thinks otherwise. So a child has its own taste of music, regardless of what his friends say. You can say it like that. So that's the affective domain. And as you can see, it's all about opinions, vision of life, awareness, and emotions. And that's very important in education as well. Then we are moving on to the psychomotor domain. And as I already stated, there are different elaborations by several authors on the psychomotor domain. But when it comes to education, I would like to point out the domain described by Anita Harrow in 1972, because it focuses on physical development of children and physical skills needed in education, like sitting on a chair or holding a pencil. These are physical skills you need to be able to have academic performance. And Harrow describes 6 levels, which start in the womb, so before even giving birth, with reflex movement of children and babies. And it gives us a framework to understand childhood development and understand the importance of physical experiences in the learning process. So in the baby stage and the pregnancy stage, we have these reflex movements. These are the involuntary movements like grasping, swallowing that babies already have, and like, for example, the shock, or when you fall, that you can hold yourself together and don't fall, that you keep your balance. These are reflex movements that are involuntary, that everybody normally has. Then we have the stage of fundamental movements, and these are the movements that you normally would develop without any formal training, except for when there's physical inability. But normally you are starting to crawl, starting to walk, you can jump, you can run without formal training. It's just something that all children develop in their own time. The next thing is the perceptual abilities. That's also something that we develop, but also needs training and practicing. And this is how you perceive the environment physically. So this is about tactile discrimination, visual discrimination, and auditive discrimination. And you can imagine, if you want to learn how to read, that it's very handy if you can make discrimination between certain words, or if it's a B or a P that's written. And the same is accounting for auditive discrimination. If you can't hear if the teacher's saying a B or a P, then it's very hard to know what the instruction is about. So this is a physical ability and not only a cognitive ability. That's very important for academic performances. Then we have the physical abilities, and that's about your body being a sound and an efficient instrument. So are you able to use your body to execute some instructions? And this is about flexibility, endurance, power. Is your back stable enough to sit on your chair for longer than 5 minutes? Can you hold your pen during an exam that's during like 2 hours? And you can imagine that this is very important as well. And the last, the 5th stage is the skilled movements. This is how you can adapt your movements either to the environment or to the material or to the situations. writing on paper is different than typing on a laptop. So you can adapt your movements. Piano is a perfect example of how you adapt your movements to the material of the piano. And playing an organ is different from playing a piano because you have to use different powering your muscles to make it sound. And the last stage we are talking about is the stage of non-discursive communication. And what they mean by non-discursive communication is this intended non-verbal communications and intended physical communications. So you use your expression and you use your body to make a message clear. So you can, and also you can see what another person means by their movements. So sometimes we do this not intended and non-intended, like the teacher's telling you something and you're, I'm tired, and looking not interested. Sometimes you do it non-intended, but if you learn how to use your body and do it intended, you can bring across a message with your body, and you can think about dance and mime, and you have to control your body into the finesse to do this perfectly, like a prima ballerina. So dancing in itself is a skilled movement, but if you are a prima ballerina, you can make a message of the music clear and translate it to the people in the audience. Then we are talking about non-discursive communication. Now, I have pointed out the domains to you. So now it's time to see what the integrated approach is about, and then see what we can do in the classroom to put this theory in practice. Just a moment. Now, as I said earlier, the authors of the original domains were advocates of an integrated approach, and they saw the student as a holistic being and a person who directs its own life and its own learning. And if you put these building blocks of the different domains together, you can see the possibilities of this integrated approach. And you can see that the student is not only remembering factual knowledge, but has feelings about it as well, and has use of its body to put down in words what he has experienced. So it helps you to specify and carefully decide what the learning goals of your students are. And there's no fragmentation. And you can also see that it's very hard to distinguish between thinking and feeling and doing, and that this is closely intertwined. And as I already said, we have the need for broad development. It's not, I think it's not a good thing that there's a one-sided focus on cognitive and academic goals, because we are human beings and we experience things and we have feelings about it and we do things. So it's very important that we have focus on not only the cognitive and academic goals, but also on the other goals in the taxonomy. And I already mentioned Sternberg as well, and he, in his theory on future leadership and successful intelligence, he states that analytic, practical, and creative intelligence is important, but combined with wisdom. And I think, especially in the effective domain, there are a lot of tools and possibilities to work on this wisdom and work on future leadership. And not the least, very important to mention that effective and psychomotor development is fundamental for cognitive and academic performance. If you can't hold a pencil, it's very hard to work on your academic performance. If you can't listen or auditively discriminate what the teacher is saying, it's very difficult to have this cognitive and development and academic performance. If you're not open to sudden subjects or the classroom or what's happening in the classroom, your academic performance will be less as it could be. So it's very fundamental, it's conditional, and we tend to forget that in this time of in this era, and I think that's a pity. So very important, and it's not only me saying that, it's also the people who designed it, the taxonomy. And what can you do? And maybe it's good to state out that this building blocks PDF will be shared with you as well in the handout, so that you can look in that later on. But I want to show you what you can do in daily practice to specify these learning goals and how you can use this as a framework for your differentiation. So to use it as this framework, you can look at the 3 domains, these building blocks I showed you in the last sheet, and they help you to build your lesson plan. So the first thing it does, it helps you to really clarify and specify your learning goals, depending, of course, on the starting point of your class and the students. And you do so by establishing the cognitive process and the knowledge we are talking about. So you can see it in this sheet. The learning goal in this sheet is that you understand conceptual knowledge. That is the specific learning goal of this lesson plan. And it's quite different to apply procedural knowledge than to understand conceptual knowledge. So it's a very different learning goal you're asking from students. So that's the first thing you can use this for, to specify the cognitive process dimension and the knowledge dimension, and specify the learning goals for your class or your students. Now, once you've done that and you have established the learning goal in your lesson, it gets really nice. Now the fun starts, as I would say, because this framework makes it quite easy to differentiate by making steps in complexity. And you can see that in this picture. This is, in my opinion, how you can stretch the environment, what we talked about. You can give different options and levels to the students concerning the same subject. And I will clarify it in the next sheet to make it, to show you a practical example. But I think this is a very nice way to make differentiation very practical. So if the learning goal is to understand conceptual knowledge, you can make the steps either in making the knowledge dimension more complex. So you can ask not only to understand the conceptual knowledge, but also understand the procedural knowledge or the metacognitive knowledge. And you can make it more difficult or complex in the cognitive process dimension. So you're not only asking to understand the conceptual knowledge, but you're also asking students to apply this conceptual knowledge, or maybe even to analyze it or evaluate it or create something with it. So you can see how it's a framework that's easily can be used to make differentiation possible. And I already told you I'd give you a practical example. And this is a very practical example of how you can do it. So for example, the subject of your lesson is the concept of the finite verb. And your initial learning goal is that you want your students to understand this concept of the finite verbs. And the instruction on that learning goal might be that you ask your students to give an example of a finite verb. But you can use differentiation for those students who already know this and already have performed this goal. So for the students who struggle, you could step back and you can see, do they remember the concept if they see it in a sentence? So you ask them to underline a finite verb in different sentences, and you can see, this student remembers what the finite verb is in this sentence. And those students who need more, who already can perform the understanding goal, you have different options in increasing the complexity. So either they have to apply it themselves, and you can see that in the rectangle where you apply the change the verbs in infinite verbs, like they go to the beach and he goes to the beach. Or you can say, you ask them to make a step in the knowledge dimension and ask them to explain the procedure. How do you recognize a finite verb in a sentence? And if they can explain that to other students, you know they have the procedural knowledge. So these steps can be expanded on both dimensions. So I hope this makes clear for you how this differentiation is made possible. Quick look at the time, a few more minutes left. So the integration, that's what we talked about as well. The most important thing, in my opinion, not only the differentiation, but the integration as well. And how you can do that, after you establish this learning goal, you use the building blocks and you thought about differentiation. So the learning goal you can see in the middle, the understanding conceptual knowledge, and you can see how the differentiation can be take part in different stages, different levels, different complexity in the knowledge dimension and in the cognitive process dimension. But then you can add practical executions in your classroom, in which the students need to use and train some physical movements, skilled movements, or perceptual abilities. So in your practical executions, you ask them, for example, listen very carefully to what I say, so that they train their auditive discrimination, and write down the finite verb, where they have to train their skilled movement. So once you've done so, you can, in the evaluation, you can work on both self-evaluations of the students and evaluation of the task. And this is important to make the students think about what they are doing and check if they were open to respond to the task, as we talked about this. Are you open to respond to the task? And how do you value what you did? So you can use the evaluation part to work on the affective domain as well. And I think if you're using the building blocks and the framework of Bloom for differentiation, then you can design your lessons taking into account both the differentiation and the integration of the domains, and thus working on motivation, love for learning, and successful intelligence.